On the Wednesday that changed everything, Lena stayed behind after last bell to return a pencil she hadn't borrowed. It lay on Ms. Varrow's desk like something museum-worthy. Lacquered midnight blue, a thin band of gold leaf spiraling its barrel. A nib sharpened so fine it could write on a breath. The rest of the class had long since spilled down the corridor, their chatter thinning into the autumn dusk. But Lena lingered because the pencil had written a sentence during class that she couldn't stop thinking about. "Every question is a door," it had said, in Ms. Varrow's clever, starlit cursive. Her literature teacher was the kind of person who never looked the same twice. One week she wore a jacket stitched with tiny silver moths. Another she brought in a brass astrolabe and let the class measure the angle of the sun from the window. She asked Lena to read aloud, not because Lena was the best at it, but because when the words stumbled, Ms. Varrow would smile at the stumble like it was a river stone, something polished by passage. Lena placed the pencil where the desk varnish had a pale groove, this pencil's usual bed, perhaps, and only then realized the classroom was empty. The hallway lights hummed, the lock on the door clicked softly as the janitor did his rounds, and a draft moved like a ribbon from the back of the room where a black curtain hung, strange in a classroom that otherwise obeyed the rules of fluorescent bulbs and laminated posters. Lena wasn't nosy. That's what she'd have told you, anyway. But she was a collector of almost-s. She stopped outside shop windows, almost going in. She held books she almost bought, hovered at parties she almost joined. Curiosity in her lived like a sleeping fox, twitching its paws in dreams. That afternoon, it woke. The draft tugged again. The black curtain quivered. Lena took one step, then another, the rubber soles of her shoes not squeaking, not quite. "Ms. Varrow?" she called, voice low, as if the room were a library and not a corridor's length from the cafeteria. No answer. She drew the curtain aside. Behind it wasn't a wall. It was a cabinet. Not a normal cabinet with binder stacks and emergency worksheets, but a tall armoire that must have been there longer than the school itself. Wood dark as spilled tea, carved all over with vines, with compass roses and lotus flowers and what looked like little clock faces with no hands. In the center, where a lock should be, was a faintly glowing knot of metal, copper braided into a pattern of taking flight. "Every question is a door," Lena murmured, and the knot of metal flickered like a candle hearing its name. She should have turned away. She should have left the pencil on the desk and gone out to the bicycle rack and ridden home under a sky the color of dishwater, like any ordinary Wednesday. Instead, she pressed her palm to the braided copper. It was cool and yet somehow thrummed, like a throat before a word. The cabinet side open. Inside, shelves climbed like ladders, elbowed with jars of folded paper, boxes labeled with handwriting in languages she didn't know, stones wrapped in wire, bundles of dried herbs, and a metal case about the size of a shoebox that didn't belong to any century Lena had visited. The case was black and matte as a shadow. Around its rim, 6 small dials showed symbols that refused to stay still. The figures swam when she tried to land on one with her eyes, like minnows folding and unfolding in creek water. Lena touched none of it at first. She was content to look. But the not-quite letters around the dials kept remaking themselves into things she almost recognized, like a word at the tip of the tongue. She reached out and traced one. The skin of her fingertip buzzed as though a fly landed there. The symbol clicked into a shape she knew, a question mark. Every question is a door. She didn't mean to lift the lid of the case. Truly, she intended only to hook a finger under the edge and feel how heavy it was. But the lid rose like it weighed nothing at all, and the air that slipped out smelled like thunderheads in a library after rain. Inside was a device, if device was the right word for something that looked part planetarium, part seashell. A central sphere, opaline, clouded, sat cradled in a ring of concentric hoops etched with constellations Lena had seen only in myth books. Lines ran from the hoops to a hand crank on the side, and the crank to a tiny, patient heart of gears. The thing was beautiful in the way dangerous things often are. It wanted to be turned. Lena felt that want in her wrists. "Don't," said a voice behind her. She spun so fast her shoulder bumped the case. Ms. Varrow stepped from the shadow of the curtain, her hair untidy as if she'd been running her hands through it, her mouth pressed so thin it could have been a seam. She looked, for the first time in Lena's memory, afraid. "I was returning your pencil," Lena said stupidly. "I know," Ms. Varrow said. She closed the curtain behind her and drew it shut so neatly the classroom itself blinked out of sight. And I know you, Lena. You ask the kind of questions that can get a person into a great deal of wonder. And trouble. Lena flushed, heat rising in her neck. I didn't mean. I believe you. Ms. Varrow came to the cabinet and looked at the device the way a person looks at an old friend they're happy and terrified to meet again. There's a reason I teach literature, she said softly. Stories are the safest ways I know to travel. What is it? Lena asked, because if a door was open it would be rude not to see what it led to. Ms. Varrow wrapped her hand around the crank. She didn't turn it. Perhaps she knew that would be enough. It's called an orrery, she said. But not for planets. For questions. That's not a thing, Lena said, which was the first sentence she'd ever spoken that she didn't entirely believe. Most things aren't until they are. A laugh flickered and died in Ms. Varrow's throat. It maps the liminal, the between places. It can open a path to where a question would lead if it were a road. There are rules, Lena. There are always rules. What rules? 1. Never turn it alone. 2. Always anchor yourself to a story. 3. If you go through, you must have a way to return. Without all 3, the device chooses what to teach you. It can be unkind. Lena looked down at the orrery. The central sphere seemed to breathe. You've used it. Once, Ms. Varrow said, and the word carried years. That was enough to learn the rules. She reached to close the case. Lena, seized by a ridiculous fear that the only interesting thing that had ever happened to her was about to be tucked away like contraband, blurted, "What did you ask?" Ms. Varrow's hand froze. I asked how to forgive what I could not forget. Oh, Lena said, who had not yet lived enough to know that forgiveness and forgetting rarely travel together. I found a door, Ms. Varrow said, and something on the other side I couldn't bring back. She exhaled slowly. Which is why Rule 3 is the one I tell first. The fluorescent bulbs outside hummed louder, as if a storm arrived and then thought better of it. Lena felt a sudden, wild certainty that if the cabinet closed, the rest of her year would be perfectly fine, perfectly quiet, perfectly ordinary, and she would lie awake at night and hear the hum of a device that was not a machine asking her why she hadn't tried. What if we follow the rules, she heard herself say. What if we turn it together? You, me, and a story. I could tie a string to the desk. Or to the shelf. Ms. Varrow's eyes moved, weighing Lena's face like a map. You'll find, if you keep living, that a string is a good thought and a poor tether. A story is better. I have one, Lena said. I mean, a story I love. The first one my mother read me that I can still recite. East of the sun and west of the moon. I know it by heart. An old road, Ms. Varrow murmured, and there was a hunger in her voice, whether for caution or courage Lena couldn't tell. All right, she decided, startling herself. All right, we will follow the rules. And here is how a Wednesday divides. Ms. Varrow fetched a strip of chalk from the tray and drew a circle on the floor in front of the cabinet, quick sigils at the compass points, little anchors of meaning. She lit, from a match struck on the cabinet's brass corner, a short candle that smelled of lemon peel and something metallic. She placed the candle at the circle's edge and set the black case in the center. We stand here, she said, and keep a hand on the device. We speak a story's first line together. If at any point either of us says stop, we stop. Do you understand? Yes, Lena said. She did. What question will you ask? Ms. Varrow said. Lena hadn't known until then that a question was required. It rose anyway, fully formed. Where did she go? She whispered, the first person who owned this. The one who carved the vines and the clock faces without hands. Ms. Varrow's mouth softened, approval and worry braided together. That question has teeth. Good. They stepped into the chalk circle. Their shoulders brushed. Lena placed her fingertips on the outermost ring of the orrery. Ms. Varrow set her palm on the handcrank. The central sphere seemed to notice them, its cloudy depths gathering a faint light like dawn in a jar. Ready? Ms. Varrow asked. Lena nodded. Together, they spoke the first sentence of the old tale. Once upon a time, as far north as the wind can carry a cry. The orrery woke. It didn't start with sound, but with pressure, a gentle push against Lena's palms as if the device were a swimmer rising to the surface. Then the hoops began to rotate, each at its own patient speed, engraved constellations catching the candle's flame, scattering tiny star shadows over the chalk and across the inside of the cabinet. The handcrank turned under Ms. Varrow's fingers as though remembering a dance. The tiny gear heart ticked and ticked. The air cooled. The lemon metal scent deepened to something like wet iron and pine. Lena's scalp tightened as if a weather change ran ghostly fingers over it. Ms. Varrow's voice continued the story, and Lena's followed. Together their words wove a chord. The central sphere brightened. Beneath the clouds in its glass lung bloomed a landscape. A drawn white road, a black hill, a small door. "Stop," Ms. Varrow said sharply. Everything paused, like a held breath. "What is it?" Lena asked, heart shouldering against her ribs. "The return," Ms. Varrow said. Her hand shook on the crank. "We need an anchor from the story to call us back. A word, a line." Lena closed her eyes and reached for the tail as one might for a staircase in the dark. "The north wind," she said. "If we say, 'North wind, carry us,' the story brings us back." Ms. Varrow considered, then nodded. "Good." Again, they spoke the line a second time. The sphere agreed. The black hill grew until it wasn't inside the glass at all. It was ahead of Lena, smellable, the scent of stone and frost. The chalk circle strained under her feet like a ship's rope. The cabinet's carved vines shivered, leaves angled to listen. The candle flame leaned. Time tipped. "Remember the rules," Ms. Varrow said. "Don't let go. Don't forget the line. If the between place offers you a bargain, ask the price twice." This last part Lena did not understand and did not have time to ask about, because the drawn white road inside the sphere uncoiled like a thread, and with a sound like pages turning into wind, the world folded. It was not a jump, it was an unfolding, an origami bird the size of a school opening its wings. Light thinned to ribbons, then rewove. The classroom was now a shadow painted on air. The cabinet became a gate, the chalk a shoreline. Ms. Varrow's hand became a warm, steadying pulse at Lena's wrist. The orrery's rings spun, and they stepped forward. Cold met them, not unkindly. Stars hung low, a neck glittering close enough to touch. Lena's breath came white. The hill from the sphere was real underfoot now, a dome of basalt carved with marks like the ones on the cabinet, dial faces without hands, interrupted vines, a compass whose east and west had traded places. The white road ran up the hill and ended at a door the size of a coin, set at Lena's ankle height. It was too small for anyone. And yet, "Between places enjoy a joke," Ms. Varrow murmured. "Look again." Lena knelt. The door grew with her gaze, like humility reversed, until it was shoulder high, then wider, then half the size of the cabinet itself. She reached out. The wood was warm, as though the hill kept secrets like a hearth keeps coals. "Ready?" Ms. Varrow said. Lena nodded, and together they pushed. The door swung inward on hinges made of whispers. Beyond was not a room but a sky. Not their sky. Constellations like paper ships floated slow as thought. Below them a field spread, a field of mirrors, thousands upon thousands, each no bigger than a palm. The mirrors were set into the ground like seedlings, their faces catching starlight and sending it to the next and the next, so the field glittered with a geometry of passing. In the middle of the mirrored field stood a device that was cousin to the one in the cabinet and not the same, taller, its hoops made of bone-white metal, its central sphere an empty rain, a hole that was somehow full. Around the base of that strange orrery strode figures in coats of many pockets, carrying coils of wire and armfuls of words. They were not people the way people are. Their edges smudged at the corners, as if whoever drew them got distracted but forgot to stop. Some had eyes like keyholes. Some trailed letters when they moved, alphabets dropping off them like leaves. Lena's grip on Ms. Varrow's wrist tightened. "Are they?" She didn't know the end of that sentence. "Cartographers," Ms. Varrow said faintly. "Mapmakers of the unanswered. I'd hope we would land near a library or a dock." She said this like a person hoping for a road and discovering a mountain. One of the mapmakers lifted their head. The keyhole eyes found them immediately, as if they'd been expected all along. The figure raised a hand and strolled over the mirrors, their boots making no sound. When they reached the door, they didn't cross its threshold. They leaned against its frame from inside, as if politeness dictated not stepping into a guest's home without invitation. "Ticket?" the mapmaker asked pleasantly, and their voice moved like a compass needle, always pointing somewhere else. "No? Ah, tourists. That changes the rate. We're not buying passage," Ms. Varrow said, steady. "We're following the scent of a question. We won't be long." "Everyone says that," the mapmaker said. They smiled, and their teeth were small knuckle bones with letters carved into them. A, E, I, O, U and sometimes Y. What is your question's shape? Lena remembered the cabinet's carvings, the vines and the dial faces, and the first set of rules. We're seeking the first keeper of our orrery, she said. The one who carved vines and clocks with no hands. Where did she go? The mapmaker's smile thinned, not unkindly. They tipped their head, as if listening to a story told very far away. Ah, they said finally. Her. She traded. We like her sort. What did she trade? Ms. Varrow asked. Her way home, the mapmaker said simply. She asked not where to go, but how to go on. They flicked their fingers, and for a breath Lena saw a woman's shadow on the mirrored field, hammer in hand, hair braided with copper wire. The shadow looked up, and though it had no face, Lena felt the heat of a gaze that knew its own hunger. Ignore the dramatics, another voice said, and a second figure approached, taller, with hair braided in mathematically impossible directions. First-time visitors should be offered tea and a quiet corner, not parables. Come in or don't, but choose. Prices? Ms. Varrow said, professional as a haggler in a market. The tall one shifted their gaze to the orrery Lena and Ms. Varrow still touched. That is an old make, they observed. Reliable. Slightly sentimental. It will cost you a story you do not want to tell and a truth you do not want to hear. They shrugged. Or you can leave now and learn both later, which always costs more. Lena felt the pull of it, the between places logic, like tides. She glanced up. The constellations twitched, re-sewing themselves into shapes that were almost the ones from her bedtime books. A bear. A bird. A road. Not yet, Ms. Varrow said under her breath, perhaps to the place, perhaps to herself. Aloud, she told the mapmakers, we have our anchor. We will look and listen only. She glanced at Lena. Keep your hand on the rein. Lena nodded, the storyline taut in her throat. North wind, carry us. The words sat there, ready like a parachute ripcord, a talisman hidden in a pocket. They stepped over the threshold. The mirrors flexed, not with weight but with witness. Lena saw herself 100 times in the shallow room of their faces. Lena false brave. Lena curious. Lena with her hair escaping its braid. Lena in the between. The mapmaker's boots didn't crease the mirrors. They walked as if on language, careful not to break any syllables. They led Lena and Ms. Varrow to the taller orrery, and Lena peered into its central ring. The hole was not empty. It was full of the other side of things. The underside of leaves, the back of mirrors, the silence beneath a word. When she leaned closer, a draft moved her hair like a hand, and she smelled cinnamon and cut grass and the inside of an attic in high summer. The under-smell of childhood. She went through here? Lena asked. Everyone goes through somewhere, said the keyhole-eyed mapmaker. She chose this ring. She asked to be put where she could learn to go on. And the ring put her with her opposite. My opposite? Lena said involuntarily. Not you, the mapmaker said, amused. Hers. The person she could never forgive and could never stop loving. The words skated across the mirrors and into Lena. She felt them lodge in that soft place behind the ribs where meanings take root late. Beside her, Ms. Varrow's hand trembled on the ring. Tell us where, Ms. Varrow said. We will not buy passage. We will pay for a direction. Directions are not cheap, the tall mapmaker said, but their tone was businesslike rather than cruel. However, you came with a good question and a decent tether. For that, you may have one glimpse. One only. No touching, no bargaining, no asking the price twice. You said to ask the price twice, Lena whispered. I did, Ms. Varrow said grimly. Which is why we will not bargain at all. The tall mapmaker set a palm on the bone-white hoop. Symbols bloomed along the metal, the way frost races along a window when the warm room blinks. A thin cord of light cinched the empty ring. The mirrors around them stilled, all their Lena selves holding breath together. Glance, the mapmaker said. The cord became a corridor. At its far end, a room unfolded, not unlike the cabinets inside, shelves, jars, paper bundles, but dustier, more precarious, as if the room were balancing. A window showed a sky full of cranes, not birds, but machines, enormous, lifting cities like chess pieces. In the center of the room stood a woman whose shadow Lena had seen, copper wire in her hair, a hammer in her hand. She was older than Lena had imagined and younger than the word, first, suggested. Time had arranged itself on her face as a river arranges stones. She turned. Her eyes were the color of new pennies. They were tired the way mountains are tired, deeply, beautifully. Lena felt something between awe and ache. The woman looked past Lena and directly at Ms. Varrow. She frowned, then smiled in the smallest possible way and said a name Lena didn't recognize, syllables that sounded like Varrow, but older. Ms. Varrow made a sound Lena had never heard from a teacher. Something like a laugh that forgot to be brave. "Not now," she said. "We're only looking." "You always were," the woman said, though Lena was not sure whether she heard it with her ears or somewhere boneward. "Looking and not touching. Tell your student to keep her questions sharp and her bargains sharper." The corridor trembled. The ring's light slackened like a bowstring. The mapmaker hissed between their teeth. "That is all," they said. "Glance is done." Lena wanted to reach and grab the corridor before it fell, to anchor it with both hands and make it promise more. Her fingers twitched on the hoop. The mirrors rustled the way 8,000 pages rustle when a wind moves through them. "North wind," Ms. Varrow said, voice flat with iron. "Carry us." The ring went dark. The door that had been a hill swung back. Cold dispersed like a thought you can't quite hold. The cabinet reasserted itself. The chalk circle was a circle again. The candle, which should have looked small and ridiculous after the constellations, looked instead like the bravest flame Lena had ever seen. They were back. Silence settled with weight and kindness. Lena realized her hand hurt. She had kept it on the ring so tightly that her knuckles had gone bloodless. She let go. The orrery sighed into stillness with a sound like a hard book closing. Ms. Varrow was breathing too quickly. She leaned against the inside of the cabinet and pressed her thumb to her tongue and then to the chalked north point, smudging the mark like closing a parenthesis. "We followed the rules," she said, as if reminding herself they were allowed to be alive. "We did," Lena said. The words in her throat, "north wind, carry us," had gone warm and tired, like a rope after a bell ringing. "What did you learn?" Ms. Varrow asked. "That the first keeper traded her way home for a way to go on," Lena said. "And that there are mapmakers of the unanswered. And that directions are not cheap. And," she hesitated, then admitted the thing that sat in the soft place behind her ribs. "And that I want to go back." Ms. Varrow's mouth crooked. "Of course you do. Wanting to go back is how you know you've gone somewhere." She closed the case with a click that sounded like a sovereign decision and slid it back onto the shelf. She drew the curtain. Beyond it, the classroom was still a classroom. Posters of poetry forms. A clock that lied about how slowly time moved. A raincoat slouched over a chairback. But the room was now a costume the world wore. Lena could see the seam. "What price would you pay?" Ms. Varrow asked quietly, not as a test but as a sharing of responsibility, for a real answer. Lena didn't lie. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I know the shape of the wanting. It feels like a door with my name on it." Ms. Varrow nodded once, then twice, as though agreeing with a chorus. "Then we will learn the prices before we pay them. That is the only wisdom I have, and even that isn't always wise." Outside, the last of the afternoon had slid off the windows and left them reflecting only the room. The janitor's cart squeaked somewhere a floor away. The clock ticked its polite lie. Lena shouldered her backpack. It felt heavier than it had that morning, as if stories had weight and she had gone and picked up two. At the door, she hesitated. "Ms. Varrow?" "Yes, Lena. What was the truth you didn't want to hear?" Ms. Varrow looked at the curtain, which looked back, the way curtains do when they are more than cloth. "That sometimes the way home requires you to become someone your old home doesn't recognize," she said. "And that isn't a betrayal. It's a border." Lena carried those words down the hallway and out into the October evening. The wind had a north in it. Leaves mispronounced the pavement. She unlocked her bicycle and rode without hurrying, because the streetlights had put on their halos, and for once the ordinary looked exactly like a place between. She expected, when she reached the corner near the bakery, to feel the day fall off her like a cloak. Instead, it stayed, settled around her shoulders like something that had decided to belong. She thought of the glimmering field of mirrors and the tall orrery's empty ring and the way the mapmaker's letters' teeth had clicked as they said rate. She thought of the woman with copper wire in her hair turning toward a window full of cranes. "Every question is a door," Lena said aloud, testing the sentence under the street lamp. "And every door is a direction." The fox of her curiosity yawned and put its chin on its paws. It wasn't sleeping. It was waiting. When Lena got home, her mother was slicing pears. The kitchen smelled like sugar and cinnamon. There was a note on the fridge about heating the stew and a doodle of a moon winking. Ordinary, ordinary, Lena told herself, and discovered that ordinary could be a kind of magic too. once you've seen the seam. She ate. She did the first half of her homework with unusual attention, and then she went to her room and took out the notebook she kept under her bed. On the first clean page she wrote, "Rules," and below that, "Never turn it alone. Anchor with a story. Have a way back. Ask the price twice, or don't bargain at all." Then she turned the page and wrote, "Questions," and "Where did she go when she traded her way home?" And, startling herself, "What would I trade, and what won't I?" She capped her pen and lay back on the quilt. The October wind carried a rumor of rain. The house creaked like a settling ship. In her bones, the rings of the orrery spun with a patience that felt like a promise. Lena did not know that the between place had its own winds and that some of them moved through walls as easily as stories move through time. She did not know that a mark had been left on her palms that would show up tomorrow in the mirror like a faint constellation. She slept anyway, and in her sleep she dreamed of a hill with a door the size of a coin that knew how large to be, and of a woman with copper in her hair who said, "Keep your questions sharp." And when she woke, Thursday already knew her name. Lena woke to a Thursday that didn't want to behave. The alarm clock insisted it was 6:15, but when she blinked at it again, the hands had crept backward to 6:12, like a guilty child trying to erase its footsteps. The mirror above her dresser showed her hair tangled as usual, but faint on both palms glimmered a constellation of dots, like freckles that hadn't been there yesterday. When she rubbed, they didn't smudge. When she pressed, they hummed faintly against her bones. She thought about hiding them under fingerless gloves, but what teenager wears gloves to school in October unless they're trying to look mysterious? Then she remembered Ms. Varrow's warning. A story is the best tether. Maybe the marks were a story written directly on her. By the time Lena cycled to school, the wind had bullied the clouds into tatters. The sun broke through, but every shadow on the sidewalk looked a fraction too sharp, as though the world had turned up its contrast. She swore the bakery's painted sign winked when she passed. She shook her head and pedaled harder. The teacher who pretended at ordinary first period literature was like walking back into the scene of a crime that hadn't decided what had been stolen. Ms. Varrow was at her desk, papers stacked with improbable neatness, as if nothing unusual whatsoever had occurred the day before. She wore a jacket embroidered with tiny cranes. Lena noticed them immediately and nearly lost her breath. They were the same as the cranes in the sky beyond the window of the other woman's world. Coincidence? The word felt useless now. When Ms. Varrow's gaze brushed across her students, it paused, just briefly, on Lena. A small nod, barely visible. Yes, we shared that secret, and we are not speaking of it here. But secrets sit like stones in the pocket of the day. Heavy. Noticeable. A question that refused to behave. By lunch, Lena couldn't help herself. She waited until the cafeteria noise drowned conversation and slid into Ms. Varrow's corner table where no one else ever sat. "Why did her shadow know your name?" Lena whispered. Ms. Varrow didn't flinch. She buttered her bread with unnecessary care. "Because once, long before you, I wasn't only a teacher. I was an apprentice." To her? To the first keeper, Ms. Varrow said. "I was younger than you are now when I found her. Or she found me. The memory won't settle on which. She taught me to read questions the way sailors read stars. But apprenticeships end, and sometimes not gently." The constellation marks on Lena's palms prickled. "She called you something that sounded like your name." Ms. Varrow's mouth thinned. "Names echo in the between. Do not say them carelessly. They can answer back." Before Lena could press further, the bell rang, scattering students like startled birds. Ms. Varrow gathered her tray and rose. "This evening," she said softly, as if the words were a bookmark. "Come to the cabinet after last bell. If you mean to continue." And she was gone. After last bell, Lena spent the rest of the day not learning geometry, not absorbing history dates, not listening to the buzz of classmates. She spent it rehearsing. "North wind, carry us." The phrase beat like a pulse in her head. At last the hallways emptied. Lena slipped back to room 214. The curtain waited, innocent and opaque. Ms. Varrow was already there, chalking a new circle on the floor, this time larger, with more sigils woven into the lines. She looked up, eyes searching Lena's face. "You still want this?" Lena nodded before doubt could catch her tongue. "Then today we learn the second rule more deeply. A story is not just tether. It is armor. Choose wisely what tale you carry." Choosing the story. "What about the same one as yesterday?" Lena asked. "East of the sun and west of the moon, I know it." It served once, Ms. Varrow agreed. But stories fray if overused. Today, something sharper. Something yours. Lena thought. All her life she'd scribbled in notebooks, half-invented tales of girls who slipped through mirrors, who rode foxes made of starlight, who asked too many questions. One of them surfaced now, stubborn as a quark. I have a story I wrote, she said. About a girl who followed the sound of a bell only she could hear. That, Ms. Varrow said, satisfaction laced with caution, is a road only you can walk. Good. They set the black case in the circle, opened it, and placed their hands on the device. The second journey. Begin, Ms. Varrow said. Lena spoke the first line of her unfinished tale. There was once a girl who heard a bell that rang inside her bones. The orrery stirred, its hoops rotating more quickly this time, as if recognizing the taste of her words. The central sphere clouded, then cleared to reveal, not the hill of before, but a bridge strung across a river of ink. On the far side flickered lanterns that burned with symbols instead of flames. The cabinet sighed into unreality. Chalk glowed like veins underfoot. And then, fold, unfold, and they were standing on the bridge. The bridge of ink. The river below whispered not with water, but with voices, thousands overlapping, each a half-asked question. Where did I put it? Will she say yes? Does this mean forever? The lanterns on the far bank swayed though no wind touched them. As Lena and Ms. Varrow walked, the bridge flexed, soaking the soles of Lena's shoes with black that left no stain. At the midpoint stood a figure, tall and narrow, cloaked in parchment stitched with threads of silver. Its face was a mask of words, sentences written in languages Lena didn't recognize. Traveler, it said, voice papery. You carry a new bell. Lena swallowed. What are you? I am the archivist of unwritten questions, the figure said. Those that died before being spoken aloud. Their echoes feed this river. It inclined its head. You seek the first keeper still. She walked this bridge long ago. Where did it lead her? Lena asked. The archivist tilted its head. To a bell that rang too loud to ignore. To her opposite, as all true seekers must face. If you wish to follow, you must offer one question you never dared to ask. Speak it, and it will sink to join the river. A price in questions. Ms. Varrow's hand tightened on Lena's shoulder. Careful. The second rule. Stories protect, but they also bind. If you give the wrong question, it may bind you forever. But the archivist waited patiently, parchment rustling in an invisible breeze. Lena's mind flipped through all her hidden questions like a frantic deck of cards. Why did Dad leave? Does Mom ever regret staying? Why'd I never feel enough? Each one burned her tongue. Finally, she whispered. What would I become if I stopped being afraid? The river hushed. The question dropped into it like a pearl into deep water. Ripples spread, carrying her words until they dissolved among the others. The archivist bowed. A strong offering. Proceed. It stepped aside. The bridge trembled but held. The lantern shore. They crossed to the far bank, where lanterns lined a path through tall grass. Each flame was a word. If, perhaps, always, never. When Lena brushed one, it chimed softly like crystal. At the path's end stood another orrery, smaller, older, its hoops rusted, its heart cracked. Through the fissure leaked light too bright to stare at. Beside it knelt a child. Or something shaped like a child, skin ink dark, hair white as chalk dust, eyes twin commas. The child traced the broken gears with gentle fingers. She came here, the child said without turning. Your first keeper. She asked the bell what song she must learn to continue. The bell answered. She went where songs turn into silence. Where's that? Lena breathed. The child looked up, and its comma eyes curved into a question mark. Beyond your next door. And with a flick of its hand, the orrery's cracked heart pulsed, once, twice, and the ground gave way. Falling into story. Lena clutched Ms. Varrow's sleeve, but they were already tumbling, not down, not up, but into. The lantern flames streaked, the bridge stretched like ink pulled thin, and voices of unanswered questions roared past. For a heartbeat, Lena feared she had let go of her tether. Then she heard her own words, her story's first line, echoing back. There was once a girl who heard a bell inside her bones. It wrapped her like a rope. When the tumbling ceased, they stood in a place Lena couldn't name. The Hall of Bells. Imagine a cavern vast as the sky, filled not with stalactites but bells, hundreds, thousands, each a different size and metal, each suspended from chains that disappeared into dark Some bells were cracked, others polished, some carved with vines, others with constellations. Together they gave off a low, endless resonance, like the breathing of the world. At the cavern's heart stood a single enormous bell carved with the same handless clocks Lena had seen on the cabinet. "That's hers," Ms. Varrow whispered, awe and grief mixing in her tone. The first keeper's question. As they approached, the bell trembled. A note shivered the air, sliding into Lena's bones. Her palms burned with the mark of constellations. She knew, with the certainty of a dream, that if she touched the bell, it would ring her question into the between, and answer. The temptation. "Don't," Ms. Varrow said sharply. The third rule. Never demand an answer without preparing for the return. You'll get truth, yes, but truth unanchored is poison. Lena's hand hovered anyway. The bell's surface shimmered, showing her flickers of herself, not as she was, but as she might be. A Lena older, standing before students. A Lena who had written books. A Lena who had chosen differently. What did she ask? Lena whispered. She asked how to go on, Ms. Varrow said. And the bell gave her silence, the kind you can only learn to live beside. Lena's throat ached. She wanted desperately to strike the bell and demand her own answer. What am I meant for? But she remembered the archivist's warning, the child's eyes shaped like a question mark, Ms. Varrow's trembling voice. She clenched her fists and stepped back. The bell quieted, disappointed but respectful. A shadow in the sound. Just as they turned to leave, the cavern echoed with a different resonance. From between the bells drifted a shape, slender, moving like smoke, eyes glowing copper. It was her, the first keeper. Her gaze slid over Lena and fixed on Ms. Varrow. Her lips curved in a sad smile. "Apprentice," she said. Lena's chest constricted. She had not expected to see her again so soon. "You should not have come here," the keeper continued. "This place answers only in echoes. And every echo takes something. What did it take from you?" Lena asked before she could stop herself. The keeper's copper eyes softened. "My name," she said simply. "I am no longer who I was. I became the silence I sought." Then she lifted a hand, pointing at Lena's glowing palms. "And now, child, it seeks you." The cavern bells began to toll, low, rising, overlapping, until the air shuddered. "The escape. Anchor now," Ms. Varrow shouted over the clamor. Lena gasped the words, clutching Ms. Varrow's wrist. "North wind, carry us." The bell's sound stretched like cloth tearing. The cavern folded, collapsed, and in a heartbeat they were back in room 214, the chalk circle smudged, the candle sputtering into smoke. Lena's knees buckled. She caught herself on a desk. Her palms still glowed faintly, and in her ears, the bell's resonance lingered. Aftermath. Ms. Varrow snapped the black case shut, breathing hard. "That was reckless," she said hoarsely. "We pushed too far. But we saw her again," Lena whispered. She said, "She lost her name. And now it seeks me." She spread her hands. The constellation marks were brighter than ever, as though inked in starlight. Ms. Varrow's face was pale. "Then the between has noticed you. And once it notices, it does not forget." Lena shivered. "What does it want?" Ms. Varrow met her eyes, grave and gentle. "The same thing it wants from everyone who opens its doors. A price. And sooner or later, you must decide if you will pay it." Lena sat down hard, her whole body trembling. She thought of the first keeper, of names traded for silence, of questions dropped into the river. And yet, beneath the fear, the wanting remained. Stronger now, like a bell still ringing inside her bones. Lena did not sleep that night so much as drift between bells. The resonance from the hall of bells throbbed in her bones, not painful, not pleasant, simply present, like the way you still feel the seas rocking after you step onto land. Twice she woke convinced the candle from room 214 flickered on her bedside table. Twice it was only the street light combing the slats of her blinds. In the morning, the constellation marks on her palms had sharpened. They were not random dots after all. They had connected themselves in the night with the faintest hairline lines, forming a sky written in miniature. A small bear, a tilted ladder, a crooked rain. When she flexed her fingers, the ring brightened. At breakfast her mother poured coffee and asked without looking up, "Big test today?" "No," Lena said, and then, because lies stained her tongue now, "Just, a big day." Her mother's spoon paused. "You don't have to be braver than necessary," she said, which was an odd, precise thing to say, and then she smiled and changed the subject to pears and a neighbor's new puppy. "Ordinary. Gentle. The kind of talk that keeps a person from unraveling. On her way out, Lena slid her sketchbook into her backpack. She'd always drawn when words stewed too long in her chest. Today, the want for graphite and paper was as fierce as thirst. A lesson in the open. At school, room 214's curtain was closed, but Ms. Varrow had left the door to the classroom propped. She stood at the board and wrote in tall, clean letters. All doors have grammar. The class laughed a little, then quieted, sensing a trick they might enjoy. Lena took her seat and found a folded note tucked under her notebook. Come after last bell. Bring a story you can carry and a thing you can afford to lose. The words fizzed against her ribs. A thing she could afford to lose? She thought of the archivist's river swallowing her question. She thought of the first keeper giving up her name. Her backpack suddenly seemed full of things that weren't safe to misplace. Her sketchbook, the pencil that always wrote darker along the left edge of its stroke, her lunch in its crinkled paper bag with her mother's small doodled moon. Today, Ms. Varrow said to the class, we're reading Borges. She handed out a story about a labyrinth and a tiger and a man who spends his life making a book with all possible permutations of letters. Pay attention to how the rules of the world contain the miracle. Contain, not constrain. Lena underlined the sentence twice and did not hear most of the discussion, because the marks on her palms had begun to answer one another. The bear to the ladder to the ring to the faint suggestion of a door with no knob. When the bell rang, she stayed in her chair and let her classmates funnel out, their perfume clouds and deodorant fogs mingling into a din. Only when the hallway had thinned did she stand. Show me your hands, Ms. Varrow said without preamble. Lena held them out like a penitent. Ms. Varrow's breath caught. The ring, she said softly. I hoped it wouldn't choose you so soon. What is it? Lena asked, though she already knew. A door. A return mark, Ms. Varrow said. The between has a sense of humor. It likes to brand the ones it doesn't intend to lose. Or the ones it hopes will return. Hard to tell with its jokes. She moved to the curtain and drew it shut, the classroom dimming to that precise dusk of secrets. You asked me to bring a thing I can afford to lose, Lena said. I don't know what that means. It means a price with change, Ms. Varrow said. Not your name. Not your anchor story. Something that hurts to pay but doesn't shatter you. She tilted her head. And it means that whether or not we bargain, there will be a cost. We can choose which. Lena thought of the pencil, the sketchbook, the paper bag with the doodled moon. She thought of the pair of ear cuffs she'd bought at the thrift store and the way their tiny fake opals caught light like stubborn wishes. She pulled them off and set them on the desk. These? She asked, embarrassed by the smallness of the offering. Fitting, Ms. Varrow said. Doors listen. Jewels pretend to be stars. If the mapmakers want them, we'll let them. If not, we'll feed the river a question you were going to outgrow anyway. You make it sound like we're going to ask for something, Lena said. We're going to refuse some things, Ms. Varrow corrected. Which is a way of asking for others. She got chalk, drew the circle with its compass points and crooked sigils, struck the match, set the candle, and lifted the case. The orrery within looked unchanged, tireless, patient. The hand crank waited like a hand hoping to be held. What story today? Ms. Varrow asked. Not a fairy tale, Lena said. Something private. She hesitated, then set her palm on the outer ring and spoke her words with the reverence of a vow. Once there was a girl who mistook silence for strength until the door in her hands began to hum. That, Ms. Varrow said, is armor. They began. The city of opposites. The orrery took their words and arranged the air. This time the sphere did not show a hill or a bridge, but a street, narrow and glistening as if scrubbed by rain, lined with buildings that faced one another like doubled pages. Every shop sign was a palindrome. Every window contained two rooms, each mirrored but slightly not. In one, a mother braided a child's hair, in the other, she unbraided it. In one, a woman wrote a letter, in the other, she burned it unread. When the fold came, it smelled like wet stone and wood smoke. They stepped into an alley tiled with old questions. Above them, laundry lines strung words instead of shirts. The wind tugged a sheet that said always and a towel that said not yet. This feels like someone's dream, Lena murmured. It's a grammar lesson, Ms. Varrow said dryly. The between thinks it's clever. At the mouth of the alley, a woman leaned against a doorframe and watched them with a frankness that made Lena flush. She was older than Ms. Varrow by a handful of years, hair plaited tight, mouth soft from remembering how to smile. A man sat on the steps beside her, his hands stained with ink and grease, a watchmaker or a printer. He had the look of someone who'd waited so long he'd mistaken waiting for home. "You took your time," the woman said. "We're not who you think," Miss Varrow said. "We're only looking." "Everyone thinks they're only looking," the man said. "Then they leave fingerprints." The woman's gaze fell to Lena's palms. The ring mark glowed like a hidden ember. "Ah," she said, not unkindly. "You'll do. I'm called Mirror Keeper here. I once had another name, but it got tired of me." She tipped her chin toward a shop front hung with necklaces made of door keys, none matching, all sighing with old uses. "You want the house of opposites, 2 streets over. The one with the knocker shaped like a question mark. They'll tell you what your mark means." Lena almost asked how the woman knew what they wanted, but the woman's face contained too many answers already. It would be rude to thicken it with more. They thanked her. As they went, the man called after them, "Take small change. The house hates large bills." "What does that mean?" Lena asked. "Prices," Ms. Varrow said. "We'll pay in pieces." The house of opposites was easy to recognize once you wanted it. Its brickwork was stitched with mortar that shimmered like ink in sunlight. The door's knocker did indeed bend into a question mark, and when Lena lifted it and let it fall, the sound it made was not knock, knock but if. The door swung on a hinge that remembered weather. A person greeted them, not a mapmaker, not the archivist, but an old woman whose hair was a crown of safety pins and who wore a coat tailored out of book spines. Her eyes were tired in the way pianists' hands are, from honest work. "You'll be wanting to know the ring's binding," she said without introduction. "In, then. Shoes off. This is a listening house." They removed their shoes. The floorboards underfoot hummed faintly, as if the house had a throat tucked under its heart. The old woman led them into a room full of mirrors that did not reflect faces but moments, some from before Lena was born, some from an hour ago, some from a minute that had not yet happened. In one mirror, Lena saw herself with wind-wet hair, laughing at a joke someone she did not yet know would tell. In another, she saw herself offering a pencil back to a desk that wasn't a desk. The lacquered midnight blue flared like a comet. "Ring," the old woman said, not to Lena but to the mark on her palms. "Speak." Lena's skin warmed. The mark answered, not in language but in shape. It tightened, then loosened, then formed a gap at its top and one on its bottom. "Ah," the old woman said. "A hinge. You're not the door, you're the hinge. Doors around you will swing. The between has tagged you as a balancer." "A what?" Lena asked. "A person at the fulcrum of choices," the woman said. "A witness who is also a lever. You will stand where someone else decides, and the deciding will flow through you like current. You will not choose for them, but you will be the grammar that makes choosing possible. And sometimes you will have to choose where to stand." Lena stared at her hands as if they'd been loaned to her by a more complicated stranger. A hinge. It felt both insulting and holy, like being called useful by a god. "What price?" Ms. Varrow asked. "Practical. The house never speaks without an invoice." The old woman's smile showed teeth like worn typewriter keys. "Pieces," she said. "Small change. A fast. A silence. A kept promise. A returned wrong. The between prefers to eat a person slowly." "I brought these," Lena said, and held up her earcuffs. They looked tinny and cheap in the house's careful light. "They're not much." The old woman accepted them with courtly solemnity, as if receiving a queen's ring. "The house accepts. In exchange, the house gives you this. A way to spend your hinge with less pain." She reached into a drawer and produced a small, thin book bound in soft gray. The cover read negations in stern serif. "Read one word from this when the door your hinges aches. The word will make the price honest." "What word?" Lena asked. The old woman shrugged. "Today, no. Another day, not yet. Another, no longer. Sometimes the only magic is a well-placed refusal." The book was light in Lena's hands, but it weighed like a decision. She slid it into her backpack next to her sketchbook, and felt something in her spine align. "Now," the old woman said, "business concluded, since you have paid, you may ask one question you cannot afford to leave here." Lena did not look at Ms. Varrow for permission. She had been standing in other people's doorways for days now. She ran her thumb across the hinge mark, felt its warm answering hum, and asked aloud, "Where is the first keeper's opposite? The person she could not forgive and could not stop loving?" The house liked this question. It hummed underfoot, approving. The mirrors sluiced like fish. One, tucked in a corner at ankle height, held still. In it Lena saw a workshop with skylights dusty from weather, a long table littered with gears and etchings, a kettle that remembered the exact second the water would boil. A man worked there, older, his hair silvering at the edges, his hands deft and nervous. He wore a chain with a small copper knot, the twin of the cabinet's lock. The maker, the old woman said. He built the first orrery with her. Then he said a cruel thing he believed true. Then time did what time does. He is where she cannot make herself return. Where is that workshop? Ms. Varrow asked. In a city that thinks it is alone, the old woman said. You'll know it by its cranes. Go quickly. Your hinge is warm. The door is already thinking about swinging. Outside their ordinary lives, in the place between, urgency had a taste, sour, necessary. Lena felt it on her tongue. She bowed as if the house were a person, and the old woman inclined her head, and the mirrors briefly reflected Lena, true, not might have beens. At the threshold, the old woman said, take your shoes. And child, spend your no with care. It is more expensive than yes. The price of speed. They stood again under the sky of palindromes and laundry and wet stone. We'll need a path, Ms. Varrow said, scanning the roofs. Not through the mapmakers. They would measure us, and I'm not a unit I wish to be. The cranes, Lena said. The keeper's opposite is beneath cranes. She pointed. Far on the skyline, a forest of mechanical arms lifted and turned, their silhouettes jagged against a daylight that had started to feel borrowed. Come, Ms. Varrow said. We'll cross the questions while they're calm. They hurried through streets that folded back on themselves just to be polite, past a fountain shaped like a parenthesis, it collected unshed tears. Under a stair that led both up and down into the same landing. Twice the city tried to keep them by offering small comforts. A bakery window where loaves braided themselves, a bench that felt like home when you sat. Twice Lena's palms warmed, and she whispered, not yet, into the spine of her new gray book, and the comforts flickered and let them go. At the edge of the city lay a yard of cranes exactly like the ones outside the first keeper's window. No, not exactly. Those had been distant, handsome. These were uncomfortably close, and their cables sang in low wind. Between the cranes stood a gate that was trying not to be noticed. Ms. Varrow reached for the latch and jerked her hand back as if burned. It wants a tithe, she said. Small change. Lena's pockets held lint, a paperclip, a scrap of paper with a doodled moon, a found button that never matched anything. She put the moon scrap on the post. The gate felt it the way a dog feels a palm and opened half an inch. Ms. Varrow laid down a hair tie. The gate graciously completed the swing. Inside, the air smelled like hot metal and ashy tea. At the first wrong bargain, Ms. Varrow warned, say no. And if no fails, say the line. North wind, carry us, Lena repeated, tasting the words like an anchor they might need to bite. They walked between cranes that lifted and resettled whole rooms, kitchens, nurseries, bookshops, moving them like chess pieces into new arrangements. It should have been monstrous, it felt tender, a city teaching itself to change. In the forest of steel, a modest door cut into a corrugated wall waited, plain, not advertised. The door smelled like ink. Lena knocked. Once. Twice. If. The door opened, and the man from the mirror looked up from a bench littered with brass hoops and gear teeth and threadings of copper. Close, he seemed both smaller and more dangerous, a man whose gentleness had an edge. We're closed, he said. Then, catching sight of the ring on Lena's palms, no. We're open. Forgive me. It's hard to tell the hour here. We're looking for a woman, Lena said, and the words felt absurd the moment they left her mouth. We're looking for the first keeper. The man flinched the way a person flinches when someone says the name of a ghost. She doesn't come here anymore, he said. Not since, well. He gestured at his workbench as if the mess could explain grief. You were her opposite, Lena said. It wasn't a question. The room folded itself around the sentence as around a heat source. He laughed once, sharply. So I am told. And I thought I was her compliment. Isn't that a word's joke? Compliment, complete. He set down the gear in his hand with surgical care. You smell like the between. Who sent you? A house, Lena said. That listens. An old woman whose hair was all safety pins. Of course, he said. She's been 80 since I was 20. Sit. I have tea that tastes like it remembers better days. They sat. The tea did, in fact, taste like nostalgia, overbrewed, mild, sweetened with a regret he did not confess. I told her the truth, he said finally. That her question would never be answered the way she wanted. That going on isn't noble, it's stubborn. I said it the day we finished the first rain. She laughed like someone breaking, and then she left, and then I never said anything worth saying again. And now? Ms. Varrow asked, voice gentled by knowing. Do you want her to come back? I want to return something, he said. He reached under the bench and brought out a small wooden box bound with copper wire. The wire was braided in the pattern from the cabinet lock, flight frozen into metal. He set the box on the table. This is her name, he said. I've kept it all these years, like an apology I couldn't pronounce. Lena's skin went cold. You took her name? She gave it, he said, defensive. Then, milder, she asked me to hold it for a while, so she could go on without it. A person unburdened by a name can change faster, she said. Then, don't let me forget I asked for this. I did let her forget. The between helped. Why not give it back? Lena asked. Go to her. Tell her you kept watch. He looked at his hands. They trembled minutely, as if picking up invisible screws. Because she is who she is, and I am who I am, and the door between those facts only swung one way then. The hinge rusted. I never learned to oil it. He slid the copper-bound box toward Lena. You're a hinge, he said softly, wonderingly, as if naming a rare bird. I can see it on you. Put this somewhere it can find her. Or keep it safe until you're ready to open the right door. Lena did not reach for the box with both hands. She put one palm, the one with the ring brighter, on the cedar, and the box answered like a violin answering the right player. What's the price? She asked, because the house had given her manners. The man's mouth quirked. A small change, he said. If you deliver this, return to me with the truth I don't want to hear. A fair exchange for the one I forced on her. He looked past Lena to Ms. Varrow. And you owe me a story. I owe you nothing, Ms. Varrow said, but not cruelly. I will bring you one anyway. He nodded, unsurprised. That is your way. There are people whose apologies are the first real thing they have made in years. The workshop hummed around them with the muted pride of a room that remembered work done right and wrong and still loved the hands that had done it. Lena put the box in her backpack with the gray book and her sketchbook. The weight settled against her spine and changed her posture. Go, the man said, suddenly urgent. The cranes are shifting a weather. The between doesn't like long visits from the same faces. Doors start to assume. They stood. At the threshold, he said her name, Lena, as if a forged thing he'd improved. She turned. I never meant to be her opposite, he said. I meant to be her echo. Don't become anyone's echo, Hinge. It's a cheap way to feel vital. What reply does a person owe that? Lena, who was learning the expensive magic of no, simply nodded. Noted, she said, and they left. The pull. Outside, the crane's cables sang louder, a low chord threaded with urgency. The city's palindromes grew tired of their own cleverness, began to flip into nonsense. Laundry flapped, never became Reven. The bench that had felt like home now felt like a letter left in the rain. Back to the chalk, Ms. Varrow said. Quickly. Lena broke into a run. Her palms burned. The hinge tightened, then eased, as if the door it belonged to had begun to swing and she was the only one preventing its slam. They darted through the house's street. The old woman was on the stoop, nodding as if to say, yes, yes. Timing is a craft. Past the parenthesis fountain, under the indecisive stare, into the alley where their entry had rewritten the air. Say it, Ms. Varrow commanded. But the alley was already collapsing like a borrowed tent being reclaimed by its owner. The curtain between worlds drew shut without waiting. The hinge mark on Lena's palm thrummed like a plucked wire. She reached for Ms. Varrow's hand. And missed. Not by much. Skin brushed skin, then the city slid its brickwork between them, and the fold took Lena alone the way surf takes a misstepped swimmer. For an instant too brief to measure, there was no chalk circle, no candle, no helpful grammar. Only the felt fact of falling into a place that might not like hinges as much as it liked doors. Lena clutched her backpack and groped for the sentence that was her ripcord. North wind, she gasped, carry. But the between, which loves a joke, paused the wind in its cheek and whispered back, not yet. The constellation stare. The fall ended not with an impact but with a landing that felt like thinking of an answer just in time. Lena found herself standing on a staircase made of constellations, each step a cluster of stars she recognized from her palms. Above her, stars sprouted like frost on glass. Below, darkness waited patiently. "You took a door alone," a voice said, neither unkind nor gentle. It sounded like the space between a knock and the opening of the door. "It took me," Lena said, and heard the distinction the way a key hears the wrong lock. "Semantics are the grammar of magic," the voice said, approving. "Proceed. That's it?" Lena asked. "Proceed? You are a hinge," the voice said. "Your work is movement. Stopping is for walls." She laughed a little, because terror and awe sometimes choose the same mouth. Then she took the first step. The stars didn't prick her soles. They hummed, like the floor of the house, like the hall of bells. The ring on her palm glowed, and each step brightened in answering sequence, as if the staircase needed her skin to remember its order. On the 8th step, she realized she was not alone. A small animal walked a few steps below, a fox made of paper, its folded edges precise, its tail a long question mark. It glanced up at her and made a sound like the word him. "I know you," Lena said, startled into laughter. "You live in my chest." The fox flicked its tail with professional aplomb. "We are acquainted," it said without speaking. "I sleep when you are sensible." "I'm not sensible now," Lena said. "You are not dull now," the fox corrected. "There is a difference. Keep your feet between the stars. Do not step on the dark. The dark is not an enemy, but it resents being used without introduction." They climbed. The stars rearranged as they went, steps becoming new constellations underfoot. Not the bear, not the ladder, but a hinge drawn in light. Halfway up, a door hovered in the air beside the stair. It had no frame. It had a knocker shaped like a semicolon. "Do I knock?" Lena asked the fox. "You are a hinge," the fox said. "Try to open." She reached. The ring on her palm flared. The door swung without touch, revealing a room that was not a room. A field at dusk, a single tree with bells hung from every branch, each bell a different size, each bell silent. Beneath the tree stood the first keeper, her hair still braided with copper wire. Her eyes no longer copper but something softer, like a coin passed hand to hand until its emperor surrendered to touch. "You," the keeper said. She smiled as if what she saw gave her both hope and ache. "You brought me my name." Lena's backpack suddenly weighed more than her body could account for. She slipped it off, knelt, and brought out the cedar box. It was warm. The copper wire thrummed faintly, a caged hum, eager. She held it with both hands, as if presenting bread. "It's heavy," Lena said, surprising herself. "Names always are," the keeper said. "They keep doors from swinging too far and breaking their hinges." She reached for the box and then paused, her fingers hovering just above the copper. "What will it cost you," she asked quietly, "to be the hinge in this exchange?" Lena thought of the old woman's book, the man's workshop, the archivist's river, the house's humming floor, the crane's moving rooms like regrets into better light. She thought of her mother's spoon pausing over coffee and the moon doodled on a scrap of paper and the way the gray negations book rode against her spine like a small spine of its own. "I owe a truth to a man," she said. "And a story to a teacher. And probably a silence to myself." She exhaled, slow. "And now I owe you a question asked out loud. Do you want your name back?" The keeper's smile wavered. The bells in the tree trembled without sound. "No one ever asked me that," she admitted. "They always assumed they knew what returning looks like." "No," Lena said softly, feeling the costly magic kindle. "Not yet. Or no longer. You can choose any of them. I'm only the hinge." The keeper's eyes brightened with an expression Lena later would learn to call respect. "You're better at this than most grown cartographers," she said. Lena shook her head. "I'm just someone who has learned to spend no. Which is all that means," the keeper said, and took the box. The bells in the tree rang, not loud, not grand, a small accord of silver and brass and clay. The copper wire unbraided itself the way a story untwists when you put it down. The cedar unlatched with a sigh. Inside lay a single word, written on a ribbon, simple and true, not a charm or cipher. Lena did not read it. That felt like looking into someone else's window at night. The keeper lifted the ribbon and pressed it to her lips as if drinking. The bells answered with a chord that made the hair rise on Lena's arms. The ring on Lena's palm loosened. The hinge relaxed. The door she'd opened began to swing shut, gently, properly. "Wait," the keeper said, stepping forward. She laid her palm lightly on Lena's cheek. Her touch smelled like cedar and lightning. A gift for a hinge. Not payment, gratitude. She traced a small, quick symbol on Lena's skin, a curved line with a dot above it, then breathed on it. It cooled into her. That's a diacritic, the keeper said. A note on your name, reminding it that you can bend without breaking. Lena almost cried from the elegant kindness of it. Tell him, the keeper added, meaning the man in the workshop, that the cruel truth he gave me was also a key. I'm using it to unlock a door he hasn't seen yet. Tell him that if he wants, he can come stand in its frame when it opens. If he chooses not to, I will forgive him no longer. No longer, Lena repeated. The negations book warmed against her spine, pleased to be invoked. And tell your teacher, the keeper said, that apprenticeships do not end, they change category. She carries that mistake like a pocket stone. She does, Lena whispered. The keeper stepped back under the bell tree. The fox at Lena's heels flicked its paper tail. Time, Hinge. Yes, the keeper agreed. The between is a poor place to linger alone. She saluted, not military, but like a person acknowledging another's good work. Go on. North wind, Lena said, but the wind was already moving without malice, pleased to obey when it had been properly introduced. The door swung. The stars rearranged underfoot into a stare down. Lena took one step. The fox did not follow. You don't need me for this part, it said, not unkind. Also I detest chalk. She laughed again, helpless and human, and then she was falling toward a circle that smelled like lemon and metal, toward a candle with brave light, toward a teacher's outstretched hand and a room that would never again be just a room. She landed on the chalk with both feet, the orrery humming its satisfied hum. The curtain swayed as if a breeze had passed through a closed window. Ms. Varrow caught her by the shoulders the way a mother cat catches a kitten, firm, grateful, slightly scolding. You broke a rule, Ms. Varrow breathed, half furious, half awed. You went alone. It took me, Lena said again, but softer now, knowing the grammar. And I came back. Her cheeks still held the keeper's diacritic, cool, precise. She touched it with 2 fingers and felt it brighten. What did you bring? Ms. Varrow asked, in the voice of someone prepared to offer a shoulder for either grief or triumph. A name returned to its owner, Lena said. A message for a maker. A debt to you. She swallowed. And a hinge. She turned her hand's palm up. The ring mark was still there, but it had opened at the top, as if allowing for the passage of a pin. It looked less like a brand now and more like a punctuation mark. That will complicate your life, Ms. Varrow said, and then, with sudden tenderness, well done. Lena sagged into a chair. Part of me wants to sleep for a week, she admitted. Part of you will not sleep for a year, Ms. Varrow said. That is how some doors open. They sat in the chalk circle a long while, the candle shortening from brave to stub. When the bell for after-school clubs finally rang, polite as always, Ms. Varrow blew out the flame. Smoke wrote cursive in the dim. Tomorrow, she said, we carry the message to the workshop. And you pay your small debt. A truth the maker doesn't want to hear, and a story I do. What truth? Lena asked, already feeling the negations book consider her spine. The one you brought back in your hands, Ms. Varrow said. The between rarely sends us on errands we would not do for ourselves. Lena stood. The room rearranged itself to look ordinary. Desks, posters, the clock lying about time. It was convincing, this disguise. The best illusions always are. At the door, she stopped and turned. What do I owe you? She asked. Not as a student. As an apprentice changed category. Ms. Varrow smiled, startled into brightness. Bring me a refusal I didn't know how to make, she said. Sometime, when it matters. The fox in Lena's chest lifted its head, attentive. Expensive, it murmured, but fair. Lena shouldered her backpack. The cedar box was gone. The weight it had left was not. She walked home through a dusk that felt like fresh paper. The city of cranes was nowhere to be seen, and yet every streetlight's halo looked like a ring with its hinge loose, ready to swing. She thought of the maker with his regretful tea, of the keeper under her beltree, of the house with its listening floor, of the stairs constructed from constellations that were somehow also in her hands. All doors have grammar, her teacher had written. Lena felt the sentence now not as a metaphor but as weather. At her desk that night she opened her sketchbook. She drew the hinge ring. She drew the semicolon knocker. She drew a fox shaped like a question. Then she turned the page and wrote, debts, and beneath it, truth for the maker. Story for the teacher. Refusal for later. She slept. No bells woke her. When morning came, it brought with it a wind from the north that did not carry her anywhere but smelled faintly of cedar and once accepted apologies. She smiled into her pillow, then rolled out of bed, equal parts terrified and ready. Morning arrived with the weather of decisions, crisp, lucid, a little too honest. Lena tucked the slim gray book Negations beside her sketchbook and cycled to school. The city wore its ordinary face convincingly. Even the bakery sign behaved. Yet as she passed the crosswalk, the painted stripes seemed, only for a breath, to hinge and swing, letting a procession of unseen travelers cross. She rang her bell to no one and felt the ring mark on her palm answer, warm as breath. Room 214 was empty. The curtain made its familiar dusk. Ms. Varrow drew the chalk circle with care that felt ceremonial rather than cautious and set the candle down as one sets a small brave animal onto a perch. Today our errands have edges, she said. We deliver a message, pay a truth, and return with a story. Keep your no ready. I'm ready, Lena said, surprised to find that it was true. Story for our tether? Ms. Varrow asked. Lena chose simple words, the kind that fit in a pocket. Once there was a girl who learned that bending is not breaking. The orrery turned. The chalk hummed. The between folded open like a book that has been waiting for a thumb. They did not land in the house of opposites, nor upon the ink bridge, nor beneath the beltree. The first step placed them in the yard of cranes. The air held tea scent and hot metal. Cables thrummed like cello strings. The modest door in the corrugated wall opened before they knocked. The maker stood there with a face that had rehearsed indifference and forgotten its lines. You came back, he said, and then, seeing Lena's hands, added softly, and you didn't come empty. I have her words, Lena said. Not her name, that's hers again, but her message. He poured tea that remembered better days and sat, the cup between his palms like a petition. She says, Lena began, pulse a metronome, that the cruel truth you gave was also a key. She's using it to open a door you haven't seen yet. If you want, you can stand in its frame when it opens. If you choose not to, she will forgive you no longer. The maker flinched as if the truth had the courtesy to knock before entering. No longer, he repeated, tasting the expensive syllables. He set his tea down untasted. I deserve that. It's not punishment, Lena said, hearing the hinge in her throat. It's grammar. A sentence cannot carry every clause forever. He made a small sound that might have been a laugh or its history. And my owed price? Lena nodded. Your truth. She did not rush. Truths delivered hurriedly bruise. You did not only keep her name because she asked. You kept it because you wanted proof she'd return to you to retrieve it. It was leverage disguised as safekeeping. You loved her, yes. You also loved being the bank. Color rose, retreated. He looked down at his hands, the honest grease, the meticulous tremor. For a moment he seemed less a man than a room remembering its former tenants. Then he exhaled, ragged. Yes, he said, that is true. He said it again, weaker, and then, stronger. That is true. The admission rearranged his face into something almost new. Return something, Ms. Varrow said gently. Today. Not to her, necessarily. To the world. He stood, moving as if his joints had been poorly oiled but were willing to learn. He began taking from shelves small hoarded things. A box of brass screws that had waited for the perfect project and grown lonely. A coil of copper he'd meant to use for a gift he never gave. A handful of watch crystals hoarded past usefulness. He set them in a neat row. There is a repair stall by the river, he said softly. I can deliver these now. Someone else's hinges deserve to swing. He faced Lena. Will you carry another message back? Tell her I will come, not as an opposite, not as a compliment, but as a person with empty hands. And if the door closes before I arrive, tell her that doors closing are not always failures. Sometimes they are the mercy of grammar. I will, Lena said. They left him then, tea cooling, apology warming, cranes adjusting the skyline with patient grace. Outside, the air had the pleasant ache of a court resolving. Lena felt the ring on her palm loosen a fraction, as if a screw set to the proper torque at last. Your story for me, Ms. Varrow said as they walked. Not a tale of the between. Something you have carried too quietly. They did not need chalk for this errand. The between had led them back into the ordinary city, which smelled like damp concrete and a bakery becoming noon. Lena swallowed. When you owe a story, the field for choosing feels wide and perilous. Almost anything can qualify, almost nothing feels worthy. She opened the gray book with her thumb and found, without looking, the word now. It steadied her. When I was 8, she said, I won a small poetry contest. I didn't tell my dad. He had already begun leaving by then, and I thought if I told him something bright he would stay to see more. I decided to save it for a better week. The better week never came. The poem felt stale in my mouth by the time I tried. That's how I learned to keep good things so safe they couldn't find me. She forced her chin up. Yesterday I realized I almost did the same to the orrery. Put the wonder on a shelf, until I'm ready. I'm ready now. Ms. Varrow's eyes shone in the way lenses shine when they are exactly focused. That is a good refusal, she said. No to saving joy for a better week. Thank you. She hesitated. And my refusal? The one I didn't know how to make? Lena thought of the first keeper calling apprenticeships a category change. She thought of the way Ms. Varrow touched the cabinet with love and fear braided fine. Say no to being only the guide, Lena said softly. Go where you won't know the rules and let someone else hold the chalk. Ms. Varrow flinched the way the maker had when his truth landed. Then a laugh cracked out of her, surprised and young. Expensive, she murmured, but I can afford it. Her hand brushed the curtain. Not today, but soon. They ate pears from a paper bag on the front steps of the school. The pears were slightly overripe, sugared with sun. People walked past not knowing their city had a hinge. A robin hopped close, hopeful as a beginner. Afternoon slanted toward the hour when rooms remember echoes. One more thing, Lena said. The keeper marked me. She touched her cheek where the diacritic cooled quietly. Do I become? She didn't finish. A wall of panic waited at the end of that sentence. You become more you, Ms. Varrow said. Which is not always comfortable and rarely tidy. The between does not conscript, it consents. Remember. The grammar is yours too. They went inside. The room, obligingly, turned into a classroom. The curtain breathed like a sleeping creature. Lena set her palms on the desk. The ring mark pulsed, then dimmed, a heartbeat relaxing after a steep flight of stairs. Will it stop? She asked. No, Ms. Varrow said frankly. But it will change shape. Hinges don't end, they wear in. Keep oil on them, stories, refusals, truths, rests. The rest is craft. The clock lied a little more, hopeful this time. The after-club bell sounded. Students drifted in looking for lost calculators, for permission slips, for a place to breathe before buses. The world resumed its brisk choreography. At home, Lena took her sketchbook to the kitchen table. Her mother set a mug beside her, hot chocolate this time, a small scandalous treat, and ruffled her hair. That thing you were ready for, her mother asked, casual like a lifeline, did it go, all right? It did, Lena said, and meant it. She drew while the steam thinned. She drew a door with a hinge like an orbit. She drew a bell with a crack that sang along the break. She drew a city of cranes rearranging sorrow into somewhere with more light. She wrote, at the bottom of the page, all doors have grammar. Then, smaller. So do I. Night came patient as an elder teacher. Lena lay in bed and listened. No bells. Only the house, kind and creaky, and the north wind bumping its shoulder against the window frame as if to say hello, not yet, soon. She dreamed, not of falling, not of being chosen by a device, but of walking through her own house turning doorknobs she had avoided for years. One led to the kitchen where the moon doodled on a scrap of paper lit the fridge like a talisman. One led to a room she had never opened which contained nothing but an empty chair and a pair of earcuffs catching light. She sat. The chair did not refuse her. In the morning, she woke before the alarm's little lie. The marks on her palms remained but had softened their brightness, the way fireflies do when the night is satisfied. She pressed her thumb to the ring. It warmed, answering, present without demand. On her way out, she tucked the gray book into her bag and, after a breath, slipped the starlit pencil beside it. In the hallway mirror she saw, briefly, kindly, the diacritic on her cheek glimmer, then settle, the faintest mark an alphabet leaves on a life. She closed the door behind her. It did not slam. It swung, sure and quiet, on hinges that had been seen to. Outside, the wind had work to do among the leaves. Lena did too. The week waited, imperfect, abundant, threaded with small prices she could afford to pay and generous change she could manage to give back. As she wheeled her bicycle into the morning, the sentence that had begun it all, every question is a door, finished itself inside her like a court resolving. Every answer is a way through, she thought. And I am the hinge.